Occasion. Good evening. My name is Arlene Miller, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this edition of Our Town. My guest this evening is Stephen Crane, the new town manager in Longmeadow. Welcome.
Thank you, Arlene.
The reason I've asked Stephen to come to speak with me is so that you, our audience, can meet him. He's been here all of 16 days or something, 17 days. And I think it's great. We're very pleased. Welcome on behalf of Longmeadow Cable Television and myself to the town of Longmeadow. Glad to have you. New energy, new ideas, all of the above. You step into a very important position in the town. You are only the second town manager to be in Longmeadow. So the first question I have for you might be the most difficult.
Okay.
Is it Stephen or Steve?
You know, I hardly even notice when people call Steve or Stephen.
Okay.
So whichever people are comfortable with,
What's your mother call you? No, maybe you don't need to.
Yeah. It depends on the situation, really. But, I usually introduce myself as Stephen, but when people call me Steve or Stephen,
it's not an insult.
No, I don't get too hung up on it.
Okay.
I'm from Massachusetts, and I lived in the Midwest for about 4 years.
Right.
And one of the things I noticed is that a very Massachusetts or Northeast thing to do is no matter what someone says their name is, automatically going to an abbreviated or nicknamed form of it. So,
okay.
Somebody in Massachusetts, it's kind of a unique thing. If someone says, "Hi, I'm James." "Hey, Jimmy, how you doing?" So I'll frequently say, "Hi, I'm Stephen Crane," and people will say, "Oh, hey, Steve, how you doing?" So.
Sure. Well, at least we don't call you SC.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, something else less flattering.
Yeah.
So either way.
So for the sake of this, I'll call you Stephen.
That's perfectly fine.
To be polite. So what attracted you to Longmeadow?
Well, Longmeadow is obviously a beautiful community. I was serving as a city administrator in Lancaster, Wisconsin, where actually my wife is from. But we enjoyed our time out there, and my career goal has been to be a municipal administrator. But we were looking to move back to the New England area, but especially Massachusetts, where I'm originally from. I'm from Lowell, and we had been living. My wife and I met in Washington, D.C., where we were both living and working, and we moved back to Lowell and lived there for about 8 years before we moved to Wisconsin. And so we were looking to make a return back this way, and so I had been looking at jobs in this region. And when Longmeadow came up, I was familiar with the community. My parents have a group of friends that are from this area, and so even though I hadn't been here until my interview, I knew that the people who lived here thought very highly of the community with good reason. I knew it had an excellent school system, almost like something out of a movie set in terms of the attractiveness of the housing.
The landscape. It's like a big park.
It is like a big park, right? But it was also, so it had a very small town feel, but it also was close enough to Springfield, Hartford, and other urban assets where, as somebody who's really an urban person,
sure,
we could enjoy the small town feel with our kids and have a good school system, but also be close enough to urban influences for arts, culture, entertainment, things like that. Because in Lancaster, we do certainly have the small town feel, but the distance to that urban influence was a little further than.
Tell me about Lancaster. Wisconsin is kind of
Milwaukee. They say Wisconsin's the hand. So
okay.
This is Green Bay. This is Lake Michigan.
Okay.
Milwaukee's kind of down here.
Oh, okay.
We are all the way on the other side of the state in what's called Grant County.
So near Minnesota.
Yes. Close to Minnesota. Really, Dubuque, Iowa is just across the Mississippi River from us.
Oh, okay.
So the Mississippi River runs through there, and we were, 10 miles from the river.
And how large was?
Lancaster is about 4,000 people, okay. And that sounds small, but in Grant County, that's actually pretty large. It was the county seat.
Yeah, okay.
So it was a full-service community with a hospital, a school district, police department, a volunteer fire department. But really, as a sports analogy, it played a lot bigger
sure.
than it sounds.
So were you a town manager there or a town
city administrator?
They called it a city.
Yeah, it is incorporated as a city.
Interesting.
And and people are always like, well, how's it 4,000 people? It's of course, city versus town is a function of incorporation,
sure.
not population. But functionally, it was a management position where the city council deferred quite a bit to the administrator, and I was expected to provide policy leadership.
Was there a mayor?
we did have a mayor, but it was a part-time mayor. It was not a strong mayor form of government. Okay. So the city administrator was essentially the manager of the community, by title, chief administrative officer, but by function, really leading the charge, just because of the personality of that particular city council.
And in Lowell, you lived in Lowell?
I lived in Lowell.
You grew up in Lowell?
I did grow up in Lowell.
Went back to Lowell.
Yes. And I was working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., I started in Washington at the George Washington
University.
University.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Good.
It all began many years ago.
My daughter went to George Washington.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
So I grew up in Lowell. I went to Syracuse University, where I had a dual major of political science and Spanish. And from there, I moved right to Washington, D.C. to intern and work on Capitol Hill to follow up on my political science degree, as well as pursue a Master's of Public Administration at the George Washington University.
Oh, okay.
And the concentration I chose within that MPA was managing state and local organizations. So even back then, I kind of had a sense of what I wanted to do. Okay. Now, I ended up staying in DC far longer, past my achievement of my master's degree than I thought, and kept working in the policy environment on Capitol Hill. And for a few years, I worked for a lobbying firm on a specific piece of the Federal Surface Transportation Policy. When I started, it was called ICE-T, and that was a law that had been done in the early 90s. The reauthorization of it was called T21. It's now been reauthorized once more, and then...
Talking about acronyms.
Yeah, talking about acronyms. So I worked on Federal Surface Transportation Policy, which really opened my eyes to how infrastructure is funded, what the needs are, and how complicated... when you say infrastructure, how complicated that is.
Above, below.
Above, right. And so, and I know that's a big topic of conversation right now in the town. And so, I have my background in infrastructure, I think, will help the community kind of sort through some of that. So after doing that, I wanted to pursue a career in local government in the furtherance of my academic pursuits with my master's degree. And so we moved back to my hometown of Lowell, and I was fortunate to work for the Planning and Development Department in Lowell as an urban renewal project manager, and I was the first person to hold that position in the new iteration. So I really got into Lowell, back to Lowell at a really good time, where the two urban renewal projects they had were really active, and so I got to learn all facets of municipal government.
And that's a city.
It is about 105,000 people.
Right.
Yeah, on the Merrimack River.
Mayor, all the above.
Actually, it's a planning form of government, so it's a city manager and city council, and again another ceremonial a mayor who's more ceremonial and chairs the meetings.
Right. Good.
So working for the city manager of Lowell, I got to do really acquisitions, dispositions, relocations, or really a lot of hands-on work within the community, but also urban planning, project management, dealing again with the practical realities of designing infrastructure improvements, constructing them, field challenges that you're running into.
Project oriented.
Correct. But it was a nice balance of kind of constituent service type functions where people were directly impacted by what we were doing and dealing with the residents directly. Design and urban planning. I was on the design team for the construction of a middle school, the construction of a parking garage with a retail component. I worked with developers we would acquire properties that were blighted, and then through a disposition process, sell them to developers to do projects that we had conceived of. And so, conceiving the project, getting selecting the developer, getting them through permitting, design, and then marketing the units. So really cradle to grave development, and then the more policy side of it of, are there changes to the city ordinances that needed to be made, working with our law department to make sure the things we were doing were...
So some of the political process was...
Correct.
Entrenched in that.
Sure, and I think the big thing is the Lowell City Council was the Redevelopment Authority, which is not all that common. Many cities have redevelopment authorities that are separate.
Right.
I think Springfield has a redevelopment authority that's separate from the city, but Lowell City Council was the redevelopment authority. So when I would prepare documents for the Lowell City Council to vote on, that they needed to vote on to take certain actions for their renewal plans, I had to make sure that legally, politically, in every other way, they were really solid, but before they got to the city council, otherwise the city manager would not be happy with that.
Sure.
So, working in that environment was really great, and it was a time in the early 2000s when Lowell's downtown and urban center really experienced a tremendous amount of revitalization. And the neighborhoods I was working in were not downtown, but downtown on its own, kind of, urban living in the early 2000s really became hot again, especially in a lot of cities.
For a brief time. Yeah.
So Lowell really capitalized on that, and it built on the work I was doing in the different neighborhoods. So it was an exciting time to be there, and it was my hometown. And so even today when I go back, I'm proud to see some of the projects I worked on that have really made permanent, lasting improvements to Lowell. And then from there, I went to work for the city of Worcester, which is another Plan E form of government. And I've kidded with people that I'm one of those Eastern Massachusetts people that thought, Massachusetts ended at 495. So then I went to Worcester and I thought, wow, look at all this stuff out here.
Yeah, Worcester's a nice city.
Worcester's a very nice city, and it really is a great gateway to Western Mass. I mean, I would drive through Western Mass on my way to Syracuse, when I was in college quite a bit, but it was a different type of position, a lot bigger scope. The project areas I was working on.
So it was economic development again?
It was special projects coordinator, which is not really an illustrative title, but there was a specific public-private partnership development called the Worcester Blackstone Visitor Center that I was brought in specifically to manage, and that was another from hiring the architects to facilitating the design to getting the design through the permitting process. Unfortunately, I ended up getting hired in Lancaster right as we were finishing permitting. And the funding on the private side fell apart. So as I was leaving, and there wasn't much I could do about it, but as I was leaving, the project kind of went on hold, and then the building, there was a historic mill building that was going to be rehabbed, and in the meantime, the building burned down. So unfortunately, the project was ill-fated, but the process, the design we came up with would have won awards. I mean, it was really a brilliant design. And the process of having a stakeholder team of like Mass DOT, the City of Worcester, the Worcester Historical Museum, the John H. Chafee Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor, which is essentially the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Department of the Interior. So a really diverse group of stakeholders, and I know the expression herding cats gets thrown around a lot. And when you're in a design environment, there's another expression that says, a camel is a racehorse designed by a committee. So
never heard that.
Yeah, so when you can see when there are times where groupthink is really good, but sometimes when you get into a design equation, it can get kind of
difficult. Yeah.
And I was really pleased with the fact that we were able to work as a group to come up with a really amazing design. Unfortunately, it never got built, but it was great. The process of doing that was really educational for me. And then the other project I worked on was a North Main Street revitalization, where they had built a new judicial center on Main Street in Worcester, but they had the old courthouse, and then the Worcester Memorial Auditorium, and then Worcester had just finished its new vocational high school. And so the vocational high school had previously been in the North Main Street area. So you had a stock of large historic buildings that were now vacant in a really critical gateway part of the city. And I managed a consultant team in terms of identifying needs, traffic studies.
You didn't just tear them down?
No. There was some selective demolition, but the ideal goal is to reuse the historic buildings. The courthouse was...
I like that mentality.
Well, right. It's really important to preserve historic buildings. Not every historic building can be preserved, but you certainly can't replace much of it. And there are times where you just run into a wall and the economics and the reuse possibilities just aren't there. But you really should make sure you've exhausted the options before you just decide to tear down first and ask questions later. Downtown Worcester really suffered from that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, which is why they built them all, and within a pretty short period of time as buildings go, it closed, and they then tore it down again to reopen the street network and rebuild it. So they were trying to undo some of the scars of, demolish first, ask questions later.
Yeah, well, Longmeadow has a lot of great historic buildings, so I hope you keep that philosophy.
Well, it's a part of the fabric of the community. A community tells its story to the rest of the world largely through its buildings. And when I first drove into Longmeadow, the story it told me was of a community that has a rich history and people who really care about their community, as demonstrated through the care for their own properties.
Yeah.
And so I am a big believer in historic preservation. I did try and bring that to Lancaster. They weren't as open to it. Lancaster had Grand County Courthouse. If you Google it, it's one of the most photogenic buildings in the entire country, and it's surrounded by a square. Instead of a main street, Lancaster has a square, and it really is a beautiful public space. And the buildings that are around it are all the 1800s buildings. They're all original. And so I was trying to promote the idea of a historic district for Lancaster, and it was ended up the city council ended up not adopting it, but I'm proud of the fact that we at least advanced the debate so people could at least understand that there are economic benefits to historic preservation. That said, there are also limits to restrictions that should be put in place, but balance is the magic word in many things we do in government.
Right.
I appreciate you saying that, Arlene.
Well, I think that's the case.
Yeah.
So you've come to Longmeadow. You've been here a couple of weeks. I know you wanted to be here badly, and that's welcome for that. So what are your visions? What problems do you see? How are you sort of proceeding? I mean, this is very early to be asking you this, so apologize if it's an unfair.
No, it's a completely fair question. I obviously had to research the community in preparation for my interview, and also so I could hit the ground running as I came here to be the town manager. In terms of visions, a future vision and addressing some issues, I mean, Longmeadow, like I said, has great resources, a committed citizenry, a select board that is, each individual member is smart. They're good people and they're committed to the town. And then, as you mentioned earlier, we have a really unbelievable team of department heads and town staff. So we don't really need you. No. Well, right, yeah. I just kind of coast along and sign things and go to meetings.
But it makes your job.
It makes the building blocks for success. The success is already established. The pattern of success is established, and the building blocks for even greater success are there. As I said in my interview, it's goal number one: don't screw it up. Things are good here, and so it'll be easy for me to bring a positive vision for things. Try and one of the things I always try and focus on doing is when an issue comes up, I think sometimes there can be a tendency to address symptoms rather than problems, and a lot of times it's the symptom of the thing that's right in front of you. Whereas if you look to the side a little bit and say, well, what's really driving this? You can find out what the problem is and address that versus always trying to, one symptom after another. Yeah, it's a more my approach to problem solving is much more holistic than just one-off. Here's the thing. Let's fix this thing and then wait for the next thing to come along. So, I think, as you mentioned, I'm only town manager version 2.0, and even though it is a very mature community, the structure of town government is really still very new. I mean, the charter was 2004, 2005 in that neighborhood.
Yep.
So it's still somewhat of a new structure of government, and the town manager position is, comparatively speaking, very new, and people are still, I think, getting accustomed to the idea of the old way, pre-charter versus the post-charter world. And so and Manager Crosby, former manager Robin Crosby, set up many structures that are really important for a town manager form of government to have. And so it's building on her foundation that she laid. And of course I had different experiences, different personality. And so as I build from that foundation, things may look a little differently than she had them, but it will really mostly be an interpretation of the goals of the community as manifested through the select board.
Right. And the town manager, the town charter does have some flexibility in it, and it's based on exactly what you said, I believe, how you choose to move it forward. So that's great. So you've come into town at probably the worst possible time to enter a new position in our town because of the annual town meeting coming up on May 7th. And one of the things I like to say repeatedly from this seat is to encourage our residents to come on May 7th to the high school at 7 o'clock for the new high school for the annual town meeting, because that's really the moment in time in our calendar year where big decisions are made that help you and the rest of the elected officials have a pathway for the next 12 months. So it's a critical meeting, in my opinion. Have you ever been to a town meeting?
I have not.
You're in for a treat.
I understand, and obviously in the position I'm getting more. I was not involved in a lot of the. I think the warrant was published.
It was
before I think my first day here, it came back from the printer. So everything that went into the warrants was kind of settled before I got here.
So
but
you
obviously,
take no responsibility for the warrant.
Well, obviously, as town manager, it's going to be my responsibility to implement whatever gets yielded by this really important legislative session, and that's where I think I've researched town meetings and tried to learn as much about the process as I possibly can. But I think the one thing the community, I'm sure they know this, but what I always have to remind myself is because I have a legislative background, it's a legislative session, and it's once a year. I know they have a fall town meeting, but the annual town meeting is the kind of once a year legislative session.
The big one. It's the big
one, and so it really, it's more than just. It's important to have your voice heard, but it's also important to really approach the process as a legislative process, and the heart of legislative process is debate and compromise and making sure that
information,
keeping informed and making informed choices and trying to make the votes that you believe will yield the greatest good for the greatest number. Now that's
well put. That's very well put.
That's a theoretical take on a legislative process, but sometimes
just like they do in Washington, right?
Just like they do in Washington.
Whoa.
Well, right. My political science degree, I learned more in the first week as an intern on Capitol Hill opening mail than I did in 4 years as a political science student. But sometimes it's important to look at how things should work while you're in the process of seeing how they do work. And so
well put.
Legislative process is important to make sure, like I said, the greatest good for the greatest number, make an informed choice, and in this political era, and I'm not talking about Longmeadow, I'm obviously talking, when you talk about the federal government, we are kind of trapped in an era of, trying to get enough votes so you can have your way,
right.
versus a let's work together and compromise and try and find middle ground. And you probably couldn't find a member of Congress that would disagree with that point, but it's really important, I think, I think Longmeadow could probably set an example, because people here are informed and people here are knowledgeable, and I think do want the best for the community.
So we have 30 issues on the warrant. Many of them are financial, and most likely, or I'm guessing, but the one battle will be the budget, because I understand there'll probably be two budgets.
Article 6,
yes. And then maybe 8 and 9 will get lumped into that. It's not unusual we sometimes clock these town meetings, because if there's no controversy, we can be in and out of there in 45 minutes or an hour. I mean, it's like this, but because it can go so quickly. In this case, it's maybe a longer town meeting, likely, but I'm reticent to ask you your opinion of what you think is going to happen, because I don't think it's fair to you. But it's my hope that that compromises are offered and that the citizens respond to those compromises. Fair?
I think that's a laudable goal, and I think everyone hopes for. I know I personally hope for a shorter town meeting than a longer one.
Right. Well, we go from financial issues, and lots of them. I mean, $57+ million worth of money we're appropriating to a lot of public works infrastructure kinds of things. I mean, big numbers. It'll be interesting to see how people get their mind around that. 2, the community preservation stuff. I mean, you recognize that we are a community preservation committee, which fits right into your historic preservation, by the way. And so those are usually more fuzzy, warm kind of items, although one may be a little controversial, to 5 or 6 zoning bylaw changes, which tend to be very confusing by and large to the general public. So that could be a extender of time. To a green communities the stretch code, following me on this stuff, you know this stuff, to a ritual of Longmeadow, the fluoride.
Yeah,
Which, have you heard about this?
Yes, I have.
Comes and goes periodically. So it could be, and typically after the budget, 50% of people leave. So it'd be interesting to see the dynamics. I'll be curious to hear your take on it after the event. I think it's the best show in town. I need to have my feet in cement before I would miss a town meeting if I had any other reason. It's very interesting to see how the dynamics play out, how various individuals handle themselves. And there's a cadre of, I don't know, 5 or 6 people who always have to say something at the town meeting. And you kind of know where they're going to come from, but they feel it's their obligation to do that. And I'm sure this happens in all town meetings. But by and large, I was on the Charter Commission, and we did a lot of research on this. And by and large, the town meetings in Longmeadow make responsible decisions. I don't always agree with them, but by and large, they play out to be responsible decisions. So it's an interesting process, and I think you'll enjoy it. But I know you're concerned about logistics.
I am, Arlene, and I did want to touch on that. I think the first thing to respond to your comment about responsible decisions, I have not been through town meeting, but I have already observed, like I mentioned, that it seems like the residents of Longmeadow are informed and engaged in what happens in Longmeadow. And so, because the foundation of democracy is self-determination, and the foundation of a good legislative process is making informed decision and participating, you can see where the pieces are in place. So even though they may be long and somewhat contentious, and there may be a lot of rhetorical flourish, I'm sure,
well put.
Because it isn't a legislative session, at the end of the day, informed, good community-based decisions are being made, and that's a positive thing. And so, and again, this is not a comment about Longmeadow, it's just legislative processes generally. Shakespeare said it best, the sound and fury signifying nothing. When you can give people the chance to voice their opinions and express their viewpoints, let them hear other people's viewpoints, and then get down to the facts. As long as you don't get in that environment where people don't let the facts get in the way of a good decision,
right.
Which I haven't sensed at all. It seems like people are pretty reasonable and rational here, so I'm not surprised at all.
Hoping the town meeting doesn't disappoint you in that regard.
No, well, like I said, I have my moments too where we all just, it feels good to say something totally off the wall, but
right.
As long as the votes are right, and I appreciate your comment that
by and large,
that by and large it works out okay. So in terms of logistics, as you know, this town meeting will be the first big show in the new school, and that's a good thing and a not so good thing in an important way. The good thing is the community is going to see what a spectacular building it is. I mean, I obviously knew here, but I was blown away by the quality of the construction and design. And I'm of the opinion if you're going to do it right. And Longmeadow certainly took that approach with the new high school. However, as you know,
that being said, it's not done.
It's not done, and it's still a construction site.
Yes.
And that is going to present some logistical issues with parking, especially, and access. So the thing I really want to stress for residents is they'll be posted online, probably, if not today, next week on the town's website.
Which would be the week before town meeting.
The week before town meeting, correct. A map of where people can park. The corner of Bliss Road and Williams is there's currently a parking lot there.
Better known as the student parking lot.
The student parking lot,
That's okay,
yes.
so just so people know. And that is still intact.
Right.
100% intact.
Yes.
Typically we don't overrun that parking lot, but you never know.
Right. The horseshoe that used to be the drop-off is no longer really there.
There is really no big drop-off except this mini horseshoe.
Yes, and I know pickup and drop-off has been an issue while the school's under construction these past few weeks anyway, but close to where the entry door is, where there is kind of a horseshoe, is where there'll be handicap parking. So people who are elderly and have a hard time getting around can park closer to the door.
So because many people might not know this, the main entrance that you're speaking of, the entrance, which is the only entrance, I'm assuming it's going to be open that night?
Yes.
Okay. Is on Grassy Gutter.
Grassy Gutter, right.
And it is on the side of the school toward Bliss. I'm assuming there's going to be signs.
You cannot see it from the road.
No, yeah.
You'll have to pay attention.
Will there be signs?
If there's one watchword for town meeting, it's signage.
Yes, okay. I'm counting on that.
If you see a sign, read it.
Yes.
Whether it deals with no parking on the side of the street, please make sure you adhere to that, because we will be enforcing parking.
For safety reasons.
For safety reasons,
Yeah,
correct. If
absolutely.
people are parking on the both sides of side streets,
It's not gonna
emergency
work.
vehicles can't get down there, and it is
Right.
really significant to, not everybody's going to choose to go to town meeting, and if residents on the side streets choose not to, their lives will be really badly disrupted by parking on both sides. So we've made the decision to make sure we enforce that, and that's why we're sending such a strong message ahead of time to people. Please observe all posted signs, especially posted parking signs. There will be signage out there directing people to parking areas, to the entrance. You cannot see the school entrance from the street yet.
Right.
So you really have to look for the fencing that's covered with tarps and things like that.
Well,
and kind of,
and signage.
And signage, and kind of follow your way around. But the area close to the entrance is going to be reserved for handicap parking, and again, that'll be enforced as well. We understand
Wait, just let me interrupt you a minute. Let's back up. So the major parking lots will be the student parking lot on the corner of Bliss and Grassy Gutter. Are you using the tennis court?
not that we're aware of now. What we're going to do
What's your second?
is there'll be a satellite lot at the Williams Street Middle School,
Oh, okay.
and we will be having a shuttle, the Council on Aging shuttle bus will be going back and forth starting at 6:15 until 45 minutes after town meeting ends.
Okay.
So if the weather's nice, it's a good constitutional, to walk back.
And they
back
could park
forth.
at the tennis court, in all fairness. You know where that is?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
They could. I don't think on the tennis court, but they could
No,
park
there's
there.
a lot. There's a parking lot.
A
They can
parking
walk.
lot. We would encourage people to avoid parking in businesses. The commercial centers there, the shops, the Big Y. They obviously own their parking lots and reserve the right to tow people who aren't customers.
Sure.
Um,
I've tried to encourage people in the few interviews that we've done this week is carpool, an old-fashioned concept, walk. Many people can walk to the town meeting, and even if you're driving and parking, leave yourself extra time and wear comfortable shoes, because it's really, there is a little bit of a walk. No matter where you park, there's going to be a little bit of a walk.
Yes. Or be prepared to go to Williams and just ride the shuttle.
Yeah.
And it's a small bus.
So the shuttle will drop you right by the entrance.
Correct.
On
Grassy Gutter.
By the mini horseshoe or on Grassy Gutter?
I'm not sure if they'll go up. I think to some extent it depends on how traffic is flowing that night.
Sure.
But they'll drop you as closest to the entrance as they can. There are other lots on school grounds that have different levels of finish. As I said, this still is a construction site. You won't be able to get into the building other than at the front entrance, because you obviously have to register with the clerk when you come in.
Right.
So we're really encouraging people. So the number one watchword is signage. The police variable messaging board, the speed board will be out there flashing messages. We're going to have it out there next week reminding people that parking will be enforced. Check the town website for this map, and we have a press release we're going to be sending out about the logistics. The other thing, of course, is just be patient.
Yes.
And it's going to be, as you noted, it's somewhat of a controversial year, and we expect a good crowd because people do want to have their voices heard on the big issues of the day. So that means there's going to be a lot more people and a lot of cars. And so, like I said, we strongly encourage people to please follow the rules and the signage and be patient with us as well as each other. And let's make it a good night.
The other thing I think that it might be important to point out is, first of all, it's in the gym, the new gym.
Yes.
And you're comfortable that the gym floor has been going to be protected, I'm sure. But there will not be tours of the high school. So if people are thinking they're going to come in and sort of mosey around the new high school, that's not going to happen. At that point, there will be many opportunities going forward to visit, and the schools embracing that idea and doing a lot, having a lot of tours.
I don't know specifically what Superintendent Doyle is preparing, but I do think you're right. I think it's going to be, you're going to enter into the main entrance, sign in, and then go directly into the gym. And then once if the gym fills up, there will be overflow outside in the cafeteria. Right. There will be at least audio in the cafeteria. You won't be able to see the projection. You won't be able to see the moderator sitting in the cafeteria, but you certainly can hear and we think possibly see. We're working with LCTV and the town school IT department on making sure all these, to make sure that those who come and are in the overflow room get the fullest possible experience.
Right. But just to be clear, that gym is huge.
It is enormous. I think
mean,
it's
it's
900 plus people can fit in the gym.
Oh, I would think plus 900. If you're going to use the bleachers too?
Including the bleachers and seats, I think are about 900, and then we think an additional 300 possibly in the cafeteria.
Oh, I'm surprised that the gym couldn't hold more than that, but I don't know. But that's a lot of people. I mean, last year we didn't get 50. I mean, we were lucky to get 50 people. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit different, but that's a lot of. I mean, our biggest ever might have been a couple of thousand.
That'd be a big deal. That would be overwhelming.
That would be overwhelming.
In the space, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think you're going to have to worry about that. But you have to be prepared.
You have to
prepare
be prepared
for the best and or
prepare for the worst and hope
for the best.
Right.
That's what it is.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So I think one of the things is they have new seats for the gym floor that are kinder to a new floor surface.
And they're going to put a cover down.
They are going to put a cover down.
Plastic cover.
So I think it's more. And the gym was designed to accommodate town meetings, so this is going to be the first test of it. But obviously, you've had many town meetings, so the people on the building committee that designed the gym were preparing for this eventuality. So I do think it'll go smoothly as long as the goings on outside the school with parking and pedestrian traffic and things like that. As long as that goes well, I think what happens inside will go smoothly too.
Well, it's going to be an exciting week. A lot of decisions will be made. I want to thank you for coming and sharing a little bit of your background and letting the residents of Longmeadow get to see a little bit of your personality instead of just see your face in the office. And you will be presenting some information about the budget at the town meeting.
I will be the town manager has traditionally presented the budget at town meeting. And although I was not involved in the preparation of the budget, I do feel it's important that as town manager, I continue to fulfill that role. So I'll basically be presenting what is in the warrant.
Brief, I hope.
Extremely brief.
Brief is good.
Extremely brief, and we will not be taking questions at that time.
Yeah.
I won't be taking questions. Certainly, our CFO, Paul Pasturzik, the select board members will be able to answer questions from the community, and I guess I'm trying to play that dumb new guy thing as long as possible.
Wow.
But I will present a few slides. I will about brief bio on me because it'll be my first interface with a lot of members of the community.
Great.
So get people to see me for warts and all.
Yeah.
And then just basically summarize what's in the warrant, really as a pro forma presentation to just continue to fulfill that role. And I promise next year I'll be much better prepared.
Oh no, I think this is great. I mean, it's great. So thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me, Arlene. I appreciate it.
And we look forward to the annual town meeting on May 7th to see a mini performance by Stephen Crane, our new town manager, at the new high school at 7 o'clock. Come early, wear comfortable shoes, follow the signs. And be patient. They have to have an acronym for that or whatever it is.
Yep.
But I want to thank you for listening, and good evening.